Have you ever been called a before? Let's face it, labels make up our everyday life, and whether we like it or not, it's true. If I can relate this to one of my favorite comic book superheroes, I would like to relate this to Spider-Man. See, Spider-Man is labeled as two different things. If you're asking most people, they would say he's the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. But if you're asking J. Jonah Jameson, the editor-in-chief of the Daily Bugle, then he would say Spider-Man is a menace. The reason he gets two labels is because one focuses on his strengths while the other focuses on his weakness. You want to know what my least favorite label is? Doubting Thomas. I actually hate the label Doubting Thomas. I hate it because Thomas is labeled for his weakness. Now, if you've been in church long enough, you've probably seen a post or two about all the many Bible characters who had a weakness. You know, just to name a few, there was Noah, who was a drunk. There was Gideon, who was afraid. There was David, who was a murderer. There was Peter, who denied Christ. And Thomas, well, Thomas was a doubter. And get me here, I do believe that God can use people's weaknesses for his glory. See, these men that I just listed, they aren't remembered for their weaknesses, but they're remembered for the incredible things they did for God. See, Noah saved humanity. Gideon led an army to victory. David conquered the giant. Peter is literally the rock that the church was built on. And you know, Thomas is remembered for being a doubter. And I hate it. See, the reason Thomas has this label, Doubting Thomas, is because when Jesus resurrected, Thomas didn't believe it happened. Thomas needed to see it to believe it. And you would think that the disciple who had seen Jesus do incredible things would believe that Jesus could come back from the grave. But then again, if you think about it, John was the only one to stick by Jesus' side when he was being crucified. See, all the other disciples ran away. See, the disciple Peter was remembered as the rock, but Thomas is remembered as a doubter. And this is because the first time Jesus showed up, he revealed himself to the disciples, and Thomas wasn't there. So the second time around, Thomas is there, and Jesus straight up tells him, "Yo, Thomas, stick your finger through the holes in my hand. Tell me if I ain't real." He even gives the line, "You believe because you see, but blessed are those who believe without seeing." Thomas is remembered for being a doubter. But in John chapter 11, see, this is a story where I truly remember Thomas. Now, Jesus had some really good friends. There was Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, all brothers and sisters. And see, at this time, Lazarus is dying. Lazarus is on his way out. Lazarus is on his deathbed. So, knowing that Jesus can heal people, they reach out to their good friend and tell him, "Yo, Jesus, the one whom you love is sick." And this is real interesting because within the Gospel of John, who John wrote, he refers to himself as the disciple who Jesus loved. And now this is incredible because John also writes that Lazarus is the one whom Jesus loved. This just shows you how much Lazarus and Jesus were friends. Now, being the good friend Jesus was, he says, "Not now." Wait, what? See, Lazarus and Jesus are terrific friends, and Lazarus knows Jesus can heal him, but Jesus says, "Later." John 11, verses 5 through 6 says this. "Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he had heard Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days." Jesus, the man who would make random people who were blind see and make the cripple walk. Jesus, A, wouldn't go see his friend immediately when he was dying, and B, he waited 2 days. Lazarus doesn't have 2 days. Lazarus is on his way out. But it's on that second day that Jesus makes up his mind and says, "You know what? Let's go see Lazarus." But there's a huge problem with this. The disciples are scared. See, Lazarus is in Judah, and the disciples tell Jesus, "Jesus, if you go to Judah, they're gonna stone you again. They're gonna try to kill you." And Jesus gives them an analogy. Jesus gives him Jesus gives them an analogy. Jesus starts to give them an analogy, but at that moment, he tells them Lazarus has died. But he starts to give them he starts to tell them an analogy, and at that moment, Jesus tells them Lazarus has died. But oh, come on, burp. Excuse me. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me? Take it as a no. I love you. I love you. Okay. See, Jesus starts to tell them an analogy, and at that moment, Lazarus dies. And Jesus he starts to tell them an analogy, and in that moment, he also tells them Lazarus has died. Even with Lazarus dead, Jesus still wants to go to Judah. He still wants to see his friends. And there's one disciple who agrees with him. Yes, you're right. It's Thomas. See, Thomas tells all of them, let's go and die with Jesus. When there's 11 people telling you, don't go, you're going to get killed, it takes some real courage. It takes a man who's bold enough to step out and say, yo, let's go die with Jesus. And that's what Thomas was. See, Thomas's strength was that he was bold. But that's not what he's remembered for. And I'm going to tell you the real reason. When Jesus went to go see Lazarus, Lazarus had already been dead for 4 days. And in the Jewish tradition, if you were dead for 4 days, you were gone. See, they thought for the first 3 days, the spirit of the person would hover over their body. But on the 4th day, it would be gone. It would leave. And so this is the moment where Jesus proves that he has power over death. See, Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, and it amazes everyone. And this is the moment I want to catch. This is why Thomas is a doubter. Because Thomas, the guy who said, yo, let's go with Jesus to Judah, let's die with him, sees Lazarus get raised from the dead, but then questions that the person who had the power to bring people back from the dead doesn't have the power to bring himself back. He has to see it to believe it. Thomas already doubted the power that he had seen for himself. How many of you today are like Thomas? I wonder how many of you have seen God move in an incredible way, and yet you still doubt that the power is there. I wonder how many of you God has spoken to clearly, and yet you still ask for 101 signs just so you can get some type of confirmation. See, if there's any of you out there that's had an experience like that, I've got good news for you. See, when Lazarus came out of the tomb, he came out with strips of linen all over his body and a cloth on his face. And then Jesus told him, take off the grave clothes and go. When Jesus died for us on the cross, he took our sin with him. See, the wages of sin was death, but because Jesus died for our sin, he now has the power over death. He now gives us a new life. And when we allow ourselves to walk in that new life, Jesus tells us, take off your doubts. Take off your labels. Take all the things that you've been worrying about. Take them off and leave them beside. He says, let go and let me work. See, I think there's a few of you today, you've been walking with your doubt. You've been walking with your label. And I want to tell you, God's already taken that from you. Thomas is remembered for his label, but we don't have to be. And that's because of what Jesus did for us. I leave you with these verses, and it's 1 Corinthians 15, verses 20 to 22. And it reads like this, but Christ has indeed been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. For since death came through a man, the resurrection of the dead also comes through a man. For as in Adam all die, so in Christ all will be made alive. And with that, bless you, and I'll see you next time.